I always look forward to Mr. Hedges' appearances on the Bad Faith podcast, which I'm sure you guys all know, but if you don't, is Briahna Joy Gray's podcast on YouTube. It's absolutely fantastic. Has some of the best, most interesting conversations in this space. I highly recommend you guys listen to the full episode if you have not already. It's all worth watching to. We're going to probably react to about 10-15 minutes of the whole interview, but the entirety of the conversation definitely worth checking out. Just another stellar interview from Briahna Joy Gray. And, like I said at the beginning of the stream, Chris Hedges is someone that we respect immensely here at the Vanguard, someone we've repeatedly looked to for guidance as leftists, for wisdom. He's just a font of insight and wisdom and historical knowledge, being a reporter for the New York Times, reported on war, and then leaving because of his anti-war stance. With all that being said, I'm excited about this interview because, despite the fact that I respect Hedges immensely, I do think Briahna offered some interesting pushback at a few points in this interview. Some pushback that I also would have offered, if I was in her position interviewing Hedges. And again, despite the fact that I agree with this guy on probably 9 out of 10 issues, it is interesting to see him engage in a conversation with some pushback, a little bit of a debate going on. So I really enjoyed that. I always find it interesting to listen to people when their views are challenged a little bit more so than just being constantly affirmed. And again, I really respect the fact that Briahna Joy Gray came out here and was able to articulate some of her disagreements and even frustrations with his answers here.
So why do you think there's no conversations? I mean, look, if you try to raise the idea of just talk about a general strike.
General strikes are political strikes. They're not strikes on Amazon. Those are on economic issues. By the time you reach the point of a general strike throughout history, you are attempting to overthrow a government. It's different.
I understand that. And we can talk about Amazon and any other given industry. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and point to random industries and say they should go on strike, right? That's not on me. And that's why I'm talking about a general strike, because I think it's useful rhetorically to get people in that mind frame to talk about historical examples of those, because ultimately, isn't that what our goal is? And ultimately what we're talking about is more revolutionary potential than just these one-off strikes.
It only comes when you have a highly organized base. So then you have a unification of labor movements.
So let me ask you this. How do we get a highly unified? I really don't want to go on this circle again because I've done it so many times with so many guests, including yourself. But this is I got to get off this carousel. We can't do anything because we don't have an organized labor base. We can't have an organized labor base because so what is it that we can do?
It takes a long time to organize. And you have Starbucks workers and it's a long process. It's not a flash mob. Flash mobs don't work.
And yet sometimes flash mobs happen and they are successful.
Name one.
These revolutionary, sometimes in limited ways, France
No, they're spectacle. It's Guy Debord. It's society is spectacle. Flash mobs, I actually went down to the Washington but what does Trump care? It didn't.
Let me ask you this, Professor Hedges. What's the example of when the long, slow organizing build has worked? Because nothing's worked. Everything's terrible everywhere. Nothing's worked by that metric.
That's not true. The Wobblies, the old CIO, the Communist Party, they were very effective. We kind of erased the Communist Party from American history. These were very effective labor movements. In fact, they were so powerful on the eve of World War I that Wilson, in the name of supporting the war, passes the Sedition Act and the Espionage Act, not to go after people providing government secrets to the Germans, but to go after the left. That's how Debs ends up in prison. That's how Emma Goldman gets deported. That's how the masses gets shut down. But that was the culmination.
So I really, kind of appreciate what Briahna Joy Gray said there when she makes the point that, this seems like a carousel, we're going round and round and round all of the time. Oh, well, we need an active labor force so that we can get these things done, but we can't get an active labor force because of all these obstacles that stand in the way. So it just feels like we're kind of spinning our wheels in the mud here. And I also kind of appreciate her frustration with the fact that, the closest example that we can come up with of something being effectively organized by a wide-ranging working class happened over 100 years ago in this country. And that's not going to inspire a lot of confidence in people. If you're like, well, you're just not talking about the victories of the communists in 1918. Guys, it's 2022 now. That means we've been getting fucked for over 100 years because that's our last good example. Okay, so that's the frustration that she's articulating here, and I'm here for it.
Of really decades, you go back to the 1890s and the robber baron issue. It takes a long time to build that stuff up, but it works.
With all due respect, even if that's true, I think that it is counterproductive to people's investment in any kind of political organization to say that like that. Because I'll tell you what, I care about a lot of things quite a bit. If you tell me it's going to take a long time and not within my lifetime, and it's going to be 40 years down the line, I will happily pack it up and go back and work for corporate America, make as much money as I can and live my life and die. I'll just live my life and die because that's the best I can get. I'm not going to waste my entire life and the little glimpse of animation that I've been granted, the spark of life on this earth, toiling so that maybe 100 years from now, somebody can have a $15 minimum wage. Like, that's not it. You know what I mean?
It's not going to take.
And before we let Hedges respond here, again, I sympathize with Briahna Joy Gray's response there, because what's the biggest issue the left consistently runs up against when we're trying to organize, when we're trying to movement build? It's convincing normal people, working people with normal lives that aren't constantly plugged into politics and the political discourse. It's trying to convince those people that it's worth it for them to join the movement, to stand side by side in solidarity and fight for these goals. If the pitch is that these goals are essentially unobtainable in our lifetime, or at least in the near future, then that's not the best pitch to make to, again, normal working class people that are trying to, live paycheck to paycheck, put food on the family for their children. They're trying to relax after their brutal 9-to-5 shift. It's not a great sales pitch. So while I certainly understand and sympathize to a degree with Chris Hedges' cynicism here, or his pessimism, I do think we need to consider the optics. I do think we need to consider the framing, again, as we try to build the movement that would be necessary in the first place to make the sort of demands that we need to make, to build the sort of movement that we need to build. So again, it's not even that Chris Hedges is necessarily wrong. I think his analysis is pretty on point, even though it is very pessimistic. But I do agree with Briahna Joy Gray's frustrations with how this might come off optically to people that already aren't on board with the revolution, so to speak.
Here's why, and we were talking about this morning when we were drinking our coffee, Gavin. Here's why you have to give at least some credit to Bernie Sanders. And it's kind of frustrating when people don't. I have a mountain of fucking criticism of Bernie Sanders and things that I would have done differently. But here's what changed specifically after 2016, right? Gavin and I both grew up in conservative as fuck Kansas. His politics were less conservative of mine, but our, surroundings were, uniformly red, right? Our concept of what American politics could be was permanently, massively expanded by Bernie Sanders' run. At that time in my life, Obamacare was like, a massive achievement, right? That people were talking about, and you'd be like, oh, well, who really cares about that? It's still really expensive to go to the doctor. The only person I know that has Obamacare can barely use it to get birth control, right? That was what I knew when I was 17, 18 years old about American politics. And then Bernie just kind of cracked the whole thing wide open, was like, no, you can have more than this. You can have more than this, and we can actually accomplish it too. That was the other thing. It was not pissing in the wind for that time period, for that stretch of time when we were all on a mission. This was not a fool's errand, right? We were all it felt like something that could really happen. And that's why he was able to energize people. That's why he was able to create momentum. And he didn't do anything with that momentum. I understand that. I'm wildly sympathetic to that argument and on the same page. But he got that momentum by inspiring people, by making them believe that it could happen. I mean, he basically took what Obama was doing in rhetoric, and he tried to, actually make it sincere, right? Let's legitimately give people healthcare with a single payer system. Let's legitimately give people access to college, not by, talking about grants and scholarships, but by making it fucking free. Damn it. Let's do it like we do public, education K through 12. Like all those things were considered basically impossibilities to so many people in America. And what Bernie did that was special was he made people believe that we could have it and we could do it together. And if you tell people that it's a pipe dream, even if you believe in it, you're fucked because you can't build a movement like that. And that cynicism kills the left. And that's why we haven't had a fucking victory in over 100 years, because you need the cynicism of Chris Hedges to make sure that the ship stays righted correctly. But you need the heart and the sales pitch of Bernie Sanders, right? And we have both of those voices represented so clearly right here with the former press secretary of Bernie Sanders, Briahna Joy Gray, and Chris Hedges, which is why this is a great conversation. But I just think they both have something here.
100 years. But to build a solid labor organization is 1-2 years of really on the ground work. But we're watching it. We're watching it again. In Amazon, we're watching it in Starbucks. We are seeing it, and that's, you know. And once you build, the only power we have are numbers, and the ability to throw a wrench into the capitalist machine.
But that's why this matters, Professor Hedges. Like, I appreciate why you don't want to care about Twitter. But the reality is, it's like being in 1930, 1940, and saying your ability to disseminate your political views through the newspapers, or to have any kind of pamphlets disseminated or conversation pieces out there about what your goals are, is irrelevant because you don't like newspaper. I mean,
well, that's not
people
correct,
are getting their news through.
Briahna, how many characters? What is it? 177 words on Twitter? Is that what you get?
It's 240 now. It's 240.
Is it up to 240? Now, tell me that you can
Yes.
actually communicate a serious idea in 240
Professor,
words.
I don't want to be.
And I will break in here again to say, again, with all due respect, love Chris Hedges. He's someone who perhaps more than anyone else on the left I look to for wisdom, for insight, etc. I think he's an absolute voice of moral clarity. However, that answer was borderline dog shit. To say that it's not possible to communicate a complex or serious idea on social media, specifically Twitter, is laughable. And I really just think it kind of shows that, you know, for all of his strengths, Chris Hedges might be a little bit out of touch when it comes to the way that the younger generations communicate with each other and how they spread ideas and spread information. And to reduce Twitter, a extremely popular social media website, to just, you know, a place where people talk shit in 140 characters and it's all meaningless, I think that's a huge missed opportunity. And again, just a misunderstanding about how people of my generation and Zac's generation communicate with each other and spread ideas, share ideas. I mean, how do you think that Bernie Sanders' campaign was as popular as it was? How do you think it generated as many donations as it did? How do you think that a lot of the modern labor unions have been as successful as they have? Even people like Chris Smalls of the Amazon Labor Union used TikTok to help get the message out, which is, of course, different than Twitter, but I imagine that Hedges would have a similar reaction to TikTok. Again, I don't love social media. I think it's often very toxic, very cancerous, very reductive. It absolutely fosters a lot of infighting and unnecessary toxicity, much of which we then go on to comment on our show. But that being said, to just completely write it off as a tool of communication, as a tool of getting the word out, again, not to be ageist, but it just is very boomerish. It's very outdated. It's very out of touch with, again, today's youth and how we communicate with each other. Social media is the new public square. Like it or not, you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to fight on those terms.
Yeah, I think a much more salient argument in this case would be that you could make like, oh, big tech is just going to kick everyone off of social media, so like, oh, then maybe it's not worth it. But that's not the point that he's making. You know, this whole idea that, like, you know, he doesn't understand the concept of a thread. It's like, no, you're not limited to 280 words. You could just keep going, and, you know, it's like turning the page in a book. It's like, oh, why would we have paper? You know, you can't fucking fit as much many ideas on this sheet of paper as I can tell you just telling you in oral history, you know. And it's like, well, I would just get another piece of paper and then I would keep articulating myself. That's how a Twitter thread would work. So trying to avoid getting like 85 angry emails. But yeah, this is very big boomer energy. So yeah, like there are obvious problems with Twitter, right? Like, yes, the oligarchs control it. They control everything, as Chris Hedges likes to remind us. So I don't see how this is that much different. It's like, should we not publish books because the oligarchs control the publishing houses? Like, you know, at what point does that become like self-defeating? It's like, yeah, you have to understand the constraints of the platform that you're using, right? I don't treat my YouTube show the same way I treat when I'm just talking to a regular stranger about their politics, or even the same way that I would write an article about something that I saw or witnessed. You know what I mean? These are different platforms. We use them differently. But yeah, I just think it's antiquated to be like, oh, I'm just going to write off this ginormously popular platform where people are interested in having their ideas changed and manipulated, at least in some capacity. You know, kind of like, why come on YouTube at all? And this just seems like a weird argument, because he seems to really love Jimmy Dore. And I'm like, Jimmy Dore's whole thesis is that he's reaching people on the internet, you know, like that he's reaching people on YouTube. And Chris Hedges just seems to think that the internet is all pretend and not like real functionality. I don't know. It's just kind of odd and a little off base for somebody who's so usually spot on.
Yeah, I agree. It's a kind of weirdly cynical and out of touch take. And obviously Twitter is not real life. You know, it's very far removed, and not everyone is on Twitter. But to completely discount it, I do find to be pretty foolish from an organizing perspective, from a perspective of getting the word out to people that might not already know about something. I mean, even if you think about the Movement for a People's Party, which has gone on to be just a total disgrace, a complete implosion of any credibility. But if you guys remember back when the MPP actually seemed exciting, it was because they did that online convention, and they actually trended on Twitter. You know, that got the word out about a third party, a new third party, in a way that we haven't seen in a while. I mean, I don't remember the last time the Green Party was in the Twitter discourse. It generated a lot of momentum, name recognition, probably donations for this new organization. And again, obviously, unfortunately, MPP turned out to be a total failure without any credibility. But, you know, maybe if we could replicate that with a better organization that does have credibility and does actually adhere to its code of ethics, then, you know, that would be a great tool. And I think it's foolish to just ignore or discount that potential because social media bad.
There are entire articles that get communicated. The entire media class is basically only consuming. No one wakes up in the morning and like says, I'm going to open the New York Times anymore. You go to your Twitter feed and you have a curated list of news to read, including people's Substacks like your own and like and David Sirota's and all of that. It comes funneled and aggregated through your timeline based on the people that you follow. And the entire journalistic class, rightly or wrongly, like it or not, is online and creating news cycles based on what is happening online, and it has a trickle-down effect through the rest of the media sphere.
Right. No. So in that sense, the ability to disseminate articles is useful, and you know, I am on social media. I don't run my Twitter account, but someone else does, and they post all my articles and my interviews and all of that. So being able to disseminate information, but actual education, which has to be part of any radical movement, is very hard to do on social media.
Right. But AOC has 11 million followers, and more than that, she has call and text lists with a commensurate number of people or more. And the question is, what people are arguing about on Twitter right now is whether or not she had an obligation to use that to funnel people to support the Amazon protest strike, to support protesters directly who live in her district and beyond, and to be calling for people to come to events like the Medicare for All protests, like these student debt protests and the like. And the reason why it matters is because if what you say is accurate, and she's basically been cowed by Nancy Pelosi and the like, and they're all useless, that's fine, well and good. But the problem is they're still out there publicly presenting us the face of the progressive movement. And they have audiences and support structures that are far beyond the progressives that got them elected. And yet they're still manifesting them. They're still kind of cosplaying, as some people would say, as leftists. And I think that ultimately has the possibility to really hurt a genuine left movement. If someone like, and again, I don't mean to, she's just a stand-in for the rest, but if someone like an AOC is being held up as this is what a progressive is, when there's actually a genuine appetite for sincere progressivism as evidenced through all of these strikes and whatnot. So either you have to fell her and reveal her for who she is, if that's the case, or push her to live up to the potential of what she said she was going to do.
Well, she isn't. I mean, I mean,
I just want to say that I think that's a great summation of AOC, and it kind of reveals the real pickle that we're all in. And actually, it reminded me of a tweet from Good Politic Guy the other day where he was talking about how you can't even, I think Gavin, you retweeted it, you can't even level mild criticism at AOC without being compared to the Jimmy Dore left. And, you know, her Simp Brigade came out, Mike from PA, and all those kinds of guys that, you know, just instinctively fawn and simp for AOC against any kind of criticism. But yeah, Briahna Joy Gray lays it out perfectly right there, because what AOC is doing is she is floating a line in like the least popular kind of politics that there is, which is, you know, not the sincere, guns a-blazing leftism that will meaningfully impact your life and uplift you that we advocate for, that Briahna advocates for, that Chris Hedges advocates for. I think that's clear at this point. She has abandoned that type of politics. She is much more interested in, you know, the corporate sanitized dialogue, you know, incrementalism, being posh, being on the cover of magazines, being the center of attention. She thinks her fame and celebrity is doing more for the cause than actively, you know, standing with workers or, you know, being in places, or at least at the very worst case scenario, she doesn't give a shit. She's just fucking, you know, in it for her own self. So at what point do you, what do you do if you're a leftist like us then, right? We've seen that she has not been pulled an ounce more leftward, when I would say from jump, I was even more to the left of Sandy from the fucking bar. When we first were introduced to her, right? Like, she was way closer to where I am, it felt like. But still, I would imagine that my politics were to the left of where she was. So I've now lost this battle as she's done a massive lurch towards the center, or just to the right. And so I'm either supposed to pretend that that's the kind of leftist that I am now. What? No. Or I don't criticize her at all, and she gets to be that extremely popular figure where she gets to say that this is what leftism is. No, that's how we lose, because then you lose all of the supporters of people who watch our show, who are actually serious about these things, who don't give a fuck about the pomp and circumstance and the theatrics and all that kind of shit. They just want meaningful outcomes, you know, and not the finger waggy Karen type neoliberalism that we often get from Democrats. And that's not just AOC, right? As she mentioned, she's a stand-in. Jamal Bowman, fucking Mondaire Jones. Everybody else is still on the shit list for being a New York congressperson that couldn't be bothered to stand with and support the Amazon labor union. So I don't know. I just think she makes a really cogent point there. And I was happy that, you know, Briahna Joy Gray is fearless enough to not just go out there and make it anyway, because sometimes when it's guys like, you know, me and Gavin, it's just, you guys are just Twitter troll misogynists. It's like, no, she's actually undergone a fucking massive political change for the worse.